welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. All right, so this is our recap post COP25, but it's not actually post COP25 because even though it's well into December 14th now, negotiations are ongoing as far as we can tell.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a little bit hard. And that's one of the, as I mentioned in our last podcast, it's one of the things that's disturbing to me about mainstream media is that they're not really putting this out there unless you are hell bent. This is not going to be a clean conversation unless you are really in there and wanting to know what's going on. They'd much rather tell you that you should be shopping at Target this week.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I was sharing with Rose that I just found a handle on Twitter called "Is COP25 Over?" It was just created and...
Oh, it was on Twitter. I didn't realize where you found it. Yeah.
Yes, 25 minutes ago, it says it still ain't over. So let's do a recap up to the minute and we'll talk more about it on next time because the news isn't good. So Rose, you've been following it.
Well, so this morning, I get up and start my day every day looking at it, and if I can, and I look at it before I go to bed at night, and always the postings are hours old and whatever. But I'm not big on Twitter, so maybe that's where I should be for the more immediacy. But right now this morning, I'm watching a video from on YouTube, and we can put the link in. Dr. Peter Carter. He's the director of Climate Emergency Institute, and he's an IPCC expert reviewer. So he's looked at all the papers that have come out through the UN, and he's
through the scientists.
He's through the scientists, and
yes.
And he is. The news is devastating. I mean, we have all these countries that are 200 countries or so that are there to come to some kind of agreement, and they're quibbling about dollars and cents and not looking at the fact that Africa is in severe drought, and
Sydney's on fire. Australia's on fire.
Sydney's on fire. The Arctic is melting. Chile is in mega drought. Brazil is on fire. The whole Midwest of the United States is still in flood condition, and that's been since the spring. There were so many crops that were not planted. We're talking about impending food shortages. I mean, again, I don't want to be an alarmist, but the reality of the situation is if we can't get people together to determine that this is happening and we all need to bear responsibility for it, but the countries that have contributed in the largest way, the U.S.
And
Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I mean, I think there's 4, and I'm not quite sure who the 4 are. Do you know who the 4 are that are blocking?
Blocking what? Because there's different countries blocking different things.
I'm sorry. I'm just so distraught right now. I can't hardly focus.
Okay, so we're going to give a quick recap, and I think that we're pretty raw right now and emotional, and I hope you understand that this is an emotional issue. I just spent an hour this morning talking with a young woman who is devastated by climate change and trying to keep some balance in her life while doing her best at her full-time job and also trying to address this climate emergency, and she says it's this disconnect when she looks around and family members and friends just are completely disconnected to this emergency. So that the emergency is what we're talking about, and it's not being recognized at COP25. That's one of the things that's being blocked, is the recognition of a climate emergency.
Yeah, I guess what I'm talking about being blocked is there's 4 countries. I think the U.S. is one of them. Saudi's one. I don't know who the other 2 are. My mind is just reeling. That are blocking it's called the 6th article from the Paris Accords, or from the Paris Agreement, and it is it's figuring out who is going to pay for the damage that's already been done. So it's helping to figure out, obviously, the underdeveloped countries, if they're paying a bigger portion than they need to be paying because they haven't caused so much of this destruction, it puts them in a poverty state that they can never get out of.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And
it says, and I'm reading from an article on The Wire, that says the role played by the United States of America on this has been particularly negative. A group of NGOs from the U.S. has called their government out on Friday for its role in stalling progress in Madrid. And so the U.S. is demanding that Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, which is what Rose is referring to, be governed only under the Paris Agreement and not under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, because of course the U.S. is pulling out. So they're saying, we're pulling out and you can't get us for compensation. But that's not the only issues. They're also disagreeing on extending the deadline for decreasing emissions for developing countries, and developed nations are opposing that, although there might be some movement on that. And so,
well, most disturbing to me is that we're at a point here in 2020 that, and we had discussed this earlier, that we need to be bringing emissions down. And under the Paris Agreement, and correct me if I'm mistaken, because I mean, doing this podcast is a labor of love, but it's also so much information in such a short amount of time that I'm trying to take in, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not schooled in this, but I feel the urgency to relay what's really going on to the general public, and that's kind of my mission. Our calling with this podcast is just to get information out there to people who might not ordinarily get it, and to kind of put it in layperson's terms about what's really going on, because it's not easily accessed information. So the most disturbing part to me is that if we are needing to be drawing down by 2020, and we don't even have mechanisms in place for what that's supposed to look like, how is that even going to happen? I mean, this Peter Carter, the guy I'm watching, he's saying that we really need to drop our emissions by 2030. We need to have our emissions cut by 50%. And yet we have no way forward, and we're quibbling about dollars and cents.
We have no way forward in a global agreement. There are countries who have committed, like Denmark has committed to decreasing its emissions by 80% by 2030.
But is Denmark one of the top 20 emitters?
No, it's not. But
yeah, okay,
but yeah, but I'm saying, but
I mean, it's like it's effing insanity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beyond belief that our so-called leaders cannot get their heads out of their butts to realize. I can't say realize, because I think they do know, and they've known for a long time. It's about profit. And
well, it's our system is set up a certain way, and this has never happened in the history of humanity, that we've had to agree together and then move this swiftly. So it is huge. But I guess the summary, in summary, we won't go into a lot of details. There's still ongoing negotiations late in the day on December 14th, as far as Rose and I can make out. And some of the big issues are the reparations, which Rose has mentioned, and also extending the deadline for developing countries to start decreasing their emissions, which developed countries have opposed. Maybe they'll come to some agreement on that. And also, there has been no agreement at this time to declare a climate emergency. So that's kind of our summary. And I wish it was more optimistic. I have to say the system isn't going down easily.
No.
It's going down.
And we knew that. And we knew that. Maybe it's the Pollyanna in me that just had
No.
high hopes for this.
Well, because the writing on the wall is becoming clearer and clearer with regards to the impacts of climate change on all of us, and the fact that we can't thrive as a global economy, never mind just thrive as humanity, with this terrible inequity that is I mean, honestly, it's been part of the system for as long as
we've been alive.
Yeah. So it's not like there hasn't been inequity before. It's getting more extreme and more exaggerated because of climate change. And I have to say, one way or the other, climate change is going to end this system. And
it is.
Either we'll move into an area where humanity can thrive, not just people in the richest part of the spectrum with humanity, or we won't be around. So on that happy note, let's end this podcast. We'll add the link to that Peter Carter video, and also some more the latest up-to-date information from COP25, but we'll talk more about this next week. And I think we're going to, as we go into solstice next weekend, our Friday podcast is the day before solstice. We're going to talk about the dark night of the soul. That's what we're going into.
It seems like that's where we are. Yep.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you.
You've been listening to a special COP25 wrap-up from Earth Feels. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Special shout out to Kristen Hoffman, singer-songwriter, for allowing us to use her beautiful song for the Ocean.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me. You see, your mother, she has been suffering, and the truth is told beneath the sea. So raise your